series as we look at African heroes. I am delighted to talk about our first hero, whose name is Dedan Kimathi. Dedan Kimathi is a central figure in Kenya's struggle for independence. Born as Kimathi Washiori in 1920 in Nyeri, Kenya, Kimathi grew up in a time when British colonial rule was at its peak. He belonged to the Kikuyu ethnic group, which is one of the largest ethnic groups in Kenya. He witnessed firsthand the injustices and hardships that were faced by his people under the British rule. Kimathi's background was modest, and he experienced the struggles of poverty and discrimination from a young age. But despite his limited formal education, he was a charismatic and intelligent individual who became deeply involved in the fight against colonialism. His background, which we say was modest, but his upbringing instilled in him a strong sense of pride in his Kikuyu heritage and a desire for freedom from colonial oppression. As he grew older, he became increasingly involved in anti-colonial activities and eventually joined the Mau Mau movement in the early 50s. Kimathi would not understand why he, a Kenyan, could not own land or walk freely around his country. He was so charismatic despite his limited formal education and intelligent. He became very deeply involved in the fight against colonialism because of these reasons. The Mau Mau was a secret society and a guerrilla force that operated in Kenya during the 1950s. The Mau Mau mostly comprised of Kikuyu fighters, but also included members of the other ethnic groups. They sought to end British domination and reclaim land and rights of the indigenous people. The Mau Mau operated through a network of cells using guerrilla tactics such as ambushes, raids, and sabotage against the British authorities and their collaborators. They also aimed to mobilize support among local population, advocating for unity and a resistance against the colonial oppression. But the picture the British depicted about the Mau Mau was a sect that was inhuman and that needed to be abolished. So they responded to the Mau Mau uprising with brutal force, implementing a scorched earth policy, burning villages to the ground and detaining thousands of suspected Mau Mau members in concentration camps where torture and abuse was rampant. Kimathi, on the other hand, became a pain for the British. Those who talk about him talk of how great of a leader he was. He was able to delegate duties among the Mau Mau, which made the Mau Mau sect a very huge force to reckon with. The British were scared of the Mau Mau. But to them, Kimathi was their greatest threat. If they got rid of him, then they would be able to take the whole Mau Mau down. As part of their strategy, the British recruited local Africans into the Home Guard, a paramilitary force tasked with suppressing Mau Mau activities. The Home Guards were often brutal and ruthless in their methods, targeting suspected Mau Mau sympathizers and their collaborators. The Mau Mau would hide in the forests and very close to the mountain. In 1956, as a few home guards were walking around looking for suspected Mau Mau members, they saw a figure running around in the forest. They called out to him and asked him to stop. He did not stop. He ran. They shot at him. The first bullet missed, the second one missed, but the third one caught him. The shadowy figure fell to the ground. They approached him. They had no idea what Dedan Kimathi looked like, so they asked what his name was. Dedan Kimathi did not hide his identity. He was not scared of these men. Although his day had come and he knew it, he confidently spoke his name. I am Dedan Kimathi Washiwiri. The men were so happy. They had captured the one man that the British really wanted to get a hold of. So the Home Guards took him to the British. Here lay Kimathi, helpless, wounded, captured by his own people, the same people he was fighting for.
In October 1956, exactly 4 years from the start of the emergency, Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi, overall commander of the Land Freedom Army, was captured. To the colonial government, the emergency
then
was
put
a war
on trial,
against criminals,
which was
and
highly
Kimathi
controversial.
was the arch-criminal.
And this trial drew international attention. And despite widespread protests and calls for clemency, Kimathi was sentenced to death and executed in 1957. Before his execution, he was allowed to see his wife, Mokami Kimathi. The one thing Kimathi asked her to do was that if she remarries, that she allows her children to still keep their surname, so that he would not be forgotten.
He was sentenced to death and hanged in February 1957. One of the last of the 1,068 Africans officially executed during the height of the struggle. On average, there was a hanging nearly every day for 4 years.
It is believed that Kimathi was buried in the grounds of Kamiti Maximum Prison. And the Home Guards who were directly involved in Kimathi's capture went through torture after his death. Most came out afterwards to say that they regretted hunting down one of their own. The villages they lived in treated them as outcasts, as traitors. Villagers avoided them like a plague. They would not go into vehicles they bought. They would not eat into restaurants they opened. Their children were mistreated in school. Kimathi's trial and execution became a symbol of the larger struggle of independence in Kenya.
We had lost the battle with the capture of Dedan Kimathi. With his capture and his death, that was the death of the revolution.
Kimathi's trial and execution became symbolic of the larger struggle for independence in Kenya, and his struggle continues to inspire generations of Kenyans fighting for justice, equality, and freedom. He died such a young man at the age of 36 years. He did not see his children grow up. He did not grow to see his wife turn gray. His family went through so much hardship, even with their father being a great fighter. But we still remember Dedan Kimathi and his dedication to independence.